Why hello you lovely little peppercorns, my name's Noa Lee, god of game criticism and lord of excellent taste, and Lil Guardsman is a Papers, Please inspired point-and-click deduction game that has been criminally overlooked since its release just a few weeks ago, and one that you should definitely be checking out. Also, this wig is a lot itchier than I was expecting. Back in 2013, when I was still living in my parents' basement and finishing up my oh-so-useful philosophy degree, I stumbled upon an experimental indie game that you've probably heard of called Papers, Please. The game was developed by former Naughty Dog employee Lucas Pope as a way to explore the difficult position of being a border control officer for the fictional Soviet-inspired country of Ostrotska. Tasked with checking papers for accuracy and forgeries, detaining suspicious individuals, and trying to make a living to feed and shelter your family during a particularly harsh winter led to one of the most bleak and hopeless works of fiction I've ever experienced. A game where no matter what you do, you only seem to make things worse for yourself and everyone else around you, and one where even the best choices and most efficient workmanship often lead to heart-wrenching consequences. And I loved every minute of it. Papers, Please was a sort of surprise hit, as its commentary on the ways in which just playing as a working stiff trying to make a living and survive can drastically impact the world around you, acting as mirror to the lives of those who may be playing, not so subtly hinting that those in similar positions as a cog in the machine have far more agency and control than they're willing to admit, and the, well, that's above my pay grade, or I'm just doing my job mentality so many of us have is merely an excuse to avoid taking meaningful action in our lives. Which brings us to Lil Guardsman, a game that isn't shy in the least about taking direct inspiration from Papers, Please, as well as, to a lesser extent, point-and-click adventure games like The Secret of Monkey Island. Lil Guardsman is a debut game of Toronto-based indie dev Hilltop Studios. In it, you play as Lil, a 12-year-old girl living in the fictional kingdom of the Sprawl who's coerced into covering various shifts for her father, one of the guardsmen of the city's several gatehouses, so he can go gamble on a local goblin ball match. As you can probably tell from this offbeat premise as well as its cutesy art style, this game is a lot more lighthearted than Papers, Please, almost to the point of acting as parody at first, at least until things get going, and I'm fine with that. We already have a dark, introspective take on this concept, so I'd much rather see what else can be done with these mechanics and setup. Still, a comparison between Lil Guardsman and Papers, Please is a difficult one not to make due to the central premise of playing as a guard who determines who gets to enter and who is turned away, but Lil Guardsman uses this setup to deliver a wildly different experience to the point that the two games are similar, only on a surface level. Part of this is due to the aforementioned graphics, which have this sort of comic strip cartoon vibe to them, both in terms of the overall look as well as the character designs, which are just as quirky. Each and every character has a distinct visual humor about them that's accentuated by a handful of dramatic expressions while being subtly animated by a simple squash and stretch effect that takes what are essentially just static images and gives them the smallest breath of life. That's another aspect that gives Lil Guardsman its own identity in comparison to Papers, Please, which is the sheer amount of story and character beats the game provides, presented in a sort of visual novel manner, with the game giving you the opportunity of responding in different ways which affect the world around you. And choice is ultimately the name of the game here, as despite the game's cutesy nature, your choices and actions very much have an impact on this world, and the lines between right and wrong, good and bad, are far more blurred than you would expect for a game with such a light tone. Each day of working in the guard shed has Lil speaking with a sequence of people who wish to enter the city, and it's your job to interrogate them to see if they're worthy of entering or not, while taking into consideration the impact your choice will make on the rest of the sprawl. During these interrogations, you're able to make up to 3 actions, ranging from talking to them, calling one of your advisors to get some advice, or using one of your various tools to get to the bottom of something suspicious. At the end of each encounter, you're given a star rating from 1 to 4 on how well the interaction went, with 1 being abysmal, 2 being okay, and 3 being good, with the game also hinting at how you might improve this score if you choose to attempt this interaction again. 4-star ratings are special in that you need to get really creative with how you interact with the person you're interrogating, with the 4-star outcome always having a lasting impact, both large or small, on the rest of the game, as well as future interactions forcing you to play smart and use your 3 action points wisely. If you choose to talk to characters, you'll have the option of believing what they say, doubting their story, or just teasing them, all 3 of which can coax them into revealing some more information about themselves, as well as potentially showing their true intentions. If you happen to get a hint that something is amiss, you can further interrogate them or use one of 5 guardsman tools to move things along. These tools include a decoder ring that can be used to crack codes and decipher strange runes, a TSA-style metal detector, a bullwhip that can be used to assert your authority as a guardsman, a portable x-ray machine, as well as some truth spray. Each of these power tools is powered by a power crystal, which you can power up with your daily ration of power crystals, with you starting each shift by choosing just how many power crystals you'd like to devote to each power tool in order to power them, while any unused power crystals roll over the next day for you to further power up your power tools. Power, power, power. After each shift, shift, you'll also have the opportunity of buying more crystals as well as upgrading your tools so you can fit more crystals into them, increasing the number of times you can use them during each shift. And this brings me to the first real flaw of this game, though admittedly it's a pretty benign one. The problem here is that these tools, which act as your upgrade progression system and give purpose to you earning currency, as upgrades and crystals are about all you can really spend your money on, are a bit underutilized to the point that this aspect of the game feels just a little tacked on and very much underdeveloped. Don't get me wrong, you sometimes have to use your guardsman tools in order to get a decent score, and you almost always have to use them to get a perfect score, but throughout the course of the game, I found myself using these same tools over and over again while completely ignoring others. Basically, it's just truth spray this, truth spray that, Bob's your uncle, have some more truth spray, occasionally use the decoder ring and the x-ray machine, and watch the bullwhip and metal detector collect dust on the shelf, as you only need to use each of them once or twice throughout the whole game. Yet in between shifts, you're able to upgrade all your gear equally, so if you don't realize early on that truth spray is king and that the metal detector is practically useless, you might end up investing into something that isn't going to help you out in the slightest. Add into this the fact that the economy surrounding power crystals is completely broken to the point that unless you're playing really recklessly, you'll almost always find yourself with way more than you need, as the only time I ever ran out was during the early moments of the game. Just a few hours in and I found myself always having enough power crystals to fully devote to every slot of all of my tools, even the useless ones, which makes me wonder why they even bothered with the power crystals at all and didn't just let you use your tools whenever you wanted. I guess they really thought there should be a progression system of some kind in the game, despite it not being needed at all. There are also these cheap knockoff power crystals which have a 50-50 chance of working or not that you can use to power up your gear as well, but because the economy of the regular power crystals is so frickin' broken, I never had to buy or make use of any of these, which again makes me wonder why they even bothered. Unfortunately, this isn't the only aspect of the game that feels a bit half-baked and sort of pointless, as the way in which you go about redoing interactions is also a bit sloppy. Earlier I hinted that you can attempt interactions with characters again to try for a better score, but what I neglected to mention was another crucial mechanic of the game, which is your ability to travel back in time using a device called the Chronometer 3000. After Lil's first shift at the guard shed, she's called to a local dig site where a scientist named Dr. B is studying the effects of the aforementioned power crystals which are mined there, creating the time-traveling device as part of her research. Dr. B chooses Lil as her test subject for the device and calibrates it to her and the guard shed exclusively. Gameplay-wise, this is just an explanation for why you can only travel back in time while at the guard shed and why you're able to repeat scenarios, though the device does have an impact on the story later on as well. If you mess up and don't get a decent enough score during your interrogations, you have the ability to rewind time up to 3 times per day and later up to 6 in order to try again, or if you really messed up, repeat the entire shift at no cost. This gives you the opportunity to try again and put the hints that the game gives you to use to hopefully achieve a better score and outcome, while the limited number of redos forces you to carefully choose which interactions you want to retry, while at the end of the day, all of your choices and interactions will become set in stone, so your choices still have meaning to them. Well, in theory. And this leads me to what I would consider to be this game's biggest flaw, which is the fact that some of the interactions are a little too obtuse and are almost designed in such a way that you can't get a decent rating unless you have some piece of information that you can only get from the game's hint system after bungling your way through the interaction your first time around. It's not a huge deal, but occasionally I would try to talk to certain characters or use one of my guardsman tools based on some piece of information that the other party let slip, but then would come up with nothing and find that I was merely being led on a wild goose chase after failing the encounter, only for the game to occasionally just flat out tell you what you need to do, to the point that redoing the interaction becomes less of a deductive puzzle like it should be and more like following a set of instructions. On the one hand, I like the idea behind the Chronometer 3000 as it takes a lot of the tension off of each interaction, allowing the player to experiment while the game avoids the largest pitfall that Papers, Please fell into with its myriad of fail states that force you to repeat a handful of days over and over again, or just start the game from the beginning in order to get a desired outcome. But on the other hand, I feel that the developers, knowing they had a mechanic like this in place from the get-go, sort of relied a bit too much on the fact that the player has a bunch of do-overs at their disposal, and in certain character interactions got more than a little lazy with their design because of it. I do think it was a really good idea to let you only use the Chronometer 3000 a handful of times during each shift rather than just whenever you wanted to force the player to have to live with certain consequences, but the ability to just freely repeat an entire shift at no cost sort of undermines this, as now the only barrier preventing the player from grinding out a perfect score on each and every interaction is how much time they're willing to spend on repeating these interactions over and over again. I would have much preferred if you simply had a set number of redos and had to live with the choices you made, with you unable to repeat entire days until after you had already beaten the game. This didn't really affect my playthrough personally, as I only used used the Chronometer 3000 to redo a handful of interactions throughout my journey, and never used it to repeat a whole day, partially because I wanted my choices to have meaning, and by just redoing everything until you get it perfect, they very much don't, but mostly because I value my time too much to be constantly redoing the same situations over and over again, especially in a game that's primarily dialogue-based. I'm not really sure what the developers were thinking here, as they absolutely came up with the perfect solution to the biggest flaw of Papers, Please while maintaining the same level of meaningful choices, but then immediately undermined it all, and for no real reason as far as I can tell. Ultimately, this isn't a huge deal, and it is left up to the player as to whether or not they want to utilize this massive cop-out to give themselves the illusion of being perfect, though it does sort of worry me that many players will go into the game aiming only for 100% completion due to the rating system and miss out on all the fun and interesting gameplay Lil Guardsman provides, regardless of how things happen to play out. This very much reminds me of that famous quote from game designer Soren Johnson that reads, "Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game," and Lil Guardsman unfortunately gives you the opportunity to do just that. Which is a shame, because there are character interactions later in the game that can only occur if you didn't get a perfect score your first time encountering said character, and callbacks and humorous jabs that show how well crafted and fully thought out most of the game really is. In addition to the guard shed interrogations, you also have the opportunity to roam around town in between your shifts with where you're able to go and what you're able to do, often depending on what took place and what choices you made during your shift, with actions you take during these moments occasionally affecting what happens during your next shift through acquiring specific items that can be given to your interrogees, or learning some piece of information about a character or current events that can be used in your deductions. These moments play out in a sort of point-and-click adventure manner, with you interacting with the world around you, finding items to give to other characters, or even doing little mini-games like betting on the local Goblin Ball match to do some illegal gambling and earn some extra cash that you very much don't need. It's also during these moments between shifts at the guard shed when much of the narrative of the game, as well as some of its best character interactions and running jokes occur, but more importantly, where a lot of the world building happens as well. The Sprawl is unlike any of the medieval-themed castle towns you've seen in other works of fiction, as thanks to its monopoly of power crystals, it has a much greater level of technology than the rest of the world and its surrounding kingdoms. This gives the game a really unique blend of a medieval world and the analog technology of the early 20th century, and even later. Radios are commonplace, as are portable tape players, jukeboxes, and electric lighting, but there's very little heavy machinery, guards still use swords and armor, and travel is still done on foot or by horse and wagon. Side note here, I just wanted to say that I love the fact that so many recent games are taking the time to put a much needed twist on a lot of overused video game settings. Last week's Graven had the unique swampy world of Cruxforth that was probably the most fully realized swamp setting I've ever seen. Lil Guardsman is now giving us a twist on the tried and true Castletown setting while deftly avoiding overused tropes and cliches, while the game that we're going to be talking about next week has a wildly different take on Christian mythology and the Crusades. We're in the midst of a revolution in video game settings right now, and it's great to see. Anyway, if nothing else, Lil Guardsman's world is among the most well thought out I've seen in a while, as it takes into consideration the effect certain aspects of its world would have on its technology and how it progresses. For example, why have heavy mining equipment when there's a race of mole people who are far more efficient and capable of digging tunnels, or why develop weapons of war when you have a bunch of highly skilled mages walking the earth, as well as the fact that your neighboring lands have technology that's already greatly inferior to your own. Hilltop Studios very much understands that technology is a result of necessity and has so expertly crafted Lil Guardsman's setting that you never once question the believability of its world. This holds true for the motivations of many of the powerful people in the Sprawl, as well as the political conflict at the center of the game's narrative. The aforementioned advisors whom you can call during your shift are all scheming and idealistic holdovers from the reign of the recently deceased king who have taken control until the princess comes of age, marries, and takes the throne, and while they're certainly a shady bunch, you never get the sense that they're out-and-out scoundrels, just people in positions of power that aren't afraid to bend the rules to craft the world that they think is best for everyone. There are political tensions with neighboring lands that later lead to all-out war with whichever kingdom happens to be spurned by the princess's choice of suitor, a choice that very much is impacted by the decisions you make during your shifts at the guard shed, as well as in and around town. Later, this causes the gameplay to get even more complex, as Lil must now draft or turn away potential soldiers looking to fight on the front lines, in addition to trying to secure food to feed the city by allying or turning away people that seek to enter, carefully managing what equipment makes it through the gates, as well as choosing to work with or against an underground group of goblin revolutionaries fighting for the equal treatment of non-humans within the Sprawl. By the time it's all said and done, Lil Guardsman has turned from a game with a very simple premise into one that has far more complexity and nuance than you'd expect from such a cartoony game. I dare say it goes even deeper into the political realities and nuances of its world than Papers, Please does, which is quite the accomplishment. This sort of nuance is conveyed by some very memorable characters who range anywhere from mere caricatures to fully fleshed out individuals with believable flaws and motivations, strengths and weaknesses that are all brought to life by some truly excellent and often hilarious dialogue, expertly delivered by a stunning cast of vocal talent. The game has a lighthearted tone that it maintains from start to finish, but it doesn't shy away from dark themes and subject matter either. Some of your choices can actually lead to certain characters dying or their livelihood being taken away. Most of these characters are of little relevance to the overall plot, but occasionally someone that you've really gotten to know throughout several hours of gameplay will meet an untimely end based on your choices, while the ending of the game you ultimately get won't necessarily be a happy one. What really surprised me about Lil Guardsman, and probably what I respect most about it, is the fact that it just doesn't give a fuck about trying to convey a message of goodwill or an anti-war narrative or trying to combat bigotry or any other social issues like that. All that stuff is very much present and touched upon, but the game isn't afraid to let you step away from that if the choices you make contradict these themes, nor is it unwilling to temporarily drop its family-friendly affect if the situation calls for it. The game will admonish you for doing something questionable, sure, but it also taunts you for not following orders even if what you chose to do was the morally acceptable option, such as letting in a poor pixelated goblin farmer named Buttface who's only looking for a better life, despite orders to turn away all goblins to prevent the growth of the goblin liberation movement. And Lil Guardsman can maintain its quirky, humorous tone while touching on dark themes and hot-button social issues without distracting from its excellent gameplay due to how much work it puts into its characters and their motivations. This is very much a character-driven story at the end of the day, and one that's so perfectly integrated into its deductive, choice-based gameplay that I can't help but admire it. Lil Guardsman is, overall, an excellent game. More than a little sloppy in some places, I'll admit, but its highlights more than make up for its minor flaws. If you're a fan of Papers, Please, this should be right up your alley, but even if you're not, I think it's a game that's very much worth a closer look, as it's unlike anything else around and is simply a joy to play from start to finish. I'm Noa Lee, god of game criticism, and thus have I spoken. Kapla!